the increase in population in Tanzania, there are very few places that have the value to be able to attract tourism into their areas, because the human footprint is getting so heavy. The wildlife, the idea of like village land that's used by wildlife really heavily has decreased dramatically in the last 20 years. So the like feasibility of creating new WMAs, you probably aren't going to see many of them created in the future because there's just not a lot of land that's not allocated that has the potential for tourism. Yeah.
So is the wildlife management area what the Hudson people have? You said they kind of control what they do in like a small portion.
Yeah. So it's not it's I don't believe that it's a wildlife management area. It is like they historically because they didn't have like a footprint on the ground, they didn't have any of those traditional native land claims under the colonial administration. So they just kept getting pushed to more and more marginal habitat as pastoralists came in and took over land. The Hadza are they're sort of like living their own way of life. They're not confrontational, and they just continue to like get pushed back and back. And so the Hadza organization is basically like Dorobo and the Peterson family in particular has worked with the Hadza to get legal representation and establish an actual like legal boundary to like their own legally owned land. So it's not a WMA, it's just like an area that is theirs and that they have the right to determine the use of.
So that's just like very different than everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah, it's
very specific.
yeah. It's essentially just like village land, like you have village land here, except that the village land here is being used for agriculture and a much more like a little more of a modern livelihood system here. Yeah.
Where in the hierarchy does WMA fall?
WMA can fall anywhere because it's established by the communities. So they could they could like move out and say like we want to establish this as fortress conservation. But the reality is it falls somewhere in like game controlled area, somewhere in the middle there where multiple uses are allowed in most of those areas. And again, like you have to have a land management plan. So typically with the WMA you have like these areas that are designated for grazing, these areas that are established for like tourism. You have to have like a management plan set up for all the different parts of the village land in order to get your WMA approved through the government.
Are forest reserves?
Yeah.
Does it allow for both consumptive and non-consumptive practices?
It does not allow for consumptive
Okay.
practices. Yeah. Let me confirm that. Oh, sorry. There are different types of forest reserves. There are different levels. There are some forest reserves that don't allow consumption. There are others that do.
Okay.
Yeah.
You might want to point out on page 7, it's not, the boundaries are not shown that well, but just you were talking about the Serengeti and the development of game reserves to
Oh, yeah.
increase the capacity of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So if you look on page 7, you'll see the Maswa Game Reserve. That's in the green area, the large one. But most of that is the Serengeti National Park, which you'll see down at the bottom left of that green area is the Maswa Game Reserve. And then up in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the Grumeti Game Reserve.
Yeah.
And then the Ngorongoro Conservation Area is over kind of on the right side of that area, and that includes. Are those dashed lines? I'm not sure. Are those NCA lines?
Yeah. So those are the boundaries between the different regions, I think.
Yeah, I think it's.
So it's not.
regions,
Yeah.
It's not
But
boundaries.
the line over. So if you look at Ngorongoro Conservation Area, then you see Engelen and Sinoni, and there's sort of the line that goes straight up from Lake Eyasi and then down across. That line is an accurate representation of the boundary between the NCA and Serengeti. And where we will be going to visit the Maasai is in the NCA. And it's sort of, if you look at Lake Eyasi, and you go right up, and there's like a dark line. That's the Rift Escarpment, and just up on top of the rift, next to the border between Maswa and the NCA, is where we'll be going to visit the Maasai.
And then, Paula, we didn't really go over the itinerary, and we probably don't want
Nope.
to.
Guinea fowl. Yeah.
But while we're at it, we should point out where the odds are.
Okay, yeah. So, on map number 7, if you look, so there's Lake Manyara right in the sort of bottom center, and then there's one pin down next to the town of Dongabesh, and then there's a pin between Dongabesh and Lake Eyasi, and that pin between Dongabesh and Lake Eyasi, that is the the section of land that has been designated for the Hadza. That mountain chain is called the Gideru Mountains. Gideru or KID. It's one of those, like, there's not really a, you can spell it either way because it's just a sound that doesn't really exist in English. So that's where we'll be going out to the Hadza. And then from Hadza we'll be going up to the pin that's right by Karatu. For a night, and then from Karatu we'll drive up through the NCA, down through Engelen, and then out to visit the Maasai. And then from there we'll drive up to that pin by Sinoni, that's in Dutu. But all of that, like everything from Engelen over through the Maswa, that's all one contiguous ecosystem. There are like cement border markers, but there are no fences or anything. And in the NCA, when we're driving, you're not even required to drive on the roads. So it's just short grass plains, and we just sort of follow wherever we want to go, whatever we see. In Serengeti, you have to drive on the roads only. Okay. Yeah, so then from Sinoni, we'll go up to Serenera, which is kind of park headquarters. That's the central part of the Serengeti ecosystem. And we'll spend our last days there, and then we'll take that road from Serenera back out through the NCA back to Karatu for our last night. And then from Karatu, we'll drive back through Arusha to fly out.
Mm-hmm. Paul,
Yes.
if you don't mind, maybe we could talk just a tiny bit about the geography and
Yeah.
the rift.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see that's the dark lines. If you look up at Lake Natron, so that's at the sort of middle top. You can see the Kenyan border coming along at a diagonal, right? But that sort of dark line just to the left, that's what's called the Natron, the Manyara Natron